I think we should start it right now. Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to the workshop. Uh, we are going to start it. As you can see, we are going to discuss about the domain name industry as a new revenue stream for, service provider in the Asia Pacific region. The reason why we actually chose to, propose this workshop in APrIGF was because of the huge potential that exists in the evolving domain name landscape across the globe. And since Asia Pacific is almost half of the world's population, so I mean its significance is more important here. So before formally starting the workshop, I'll introduce myself. I'm Zakir Syed from Pakistan. I work for an organization that called SAMENA Telecommunications Council. We basically work with different stakeholders within the South Asia, Middle East, and North African region, covering telecom and ICT policy issues. We have got a very small but very strong panel. We've got Leonid Todorov, who is actually managing Asia Pacific top level domain. Of course, I mean, these guys don't need any introduction, but just for those people who actually are new to the system. So yeah, then we have got Jiarong, who is managing the Asia Pacific hub, in the Singapore hub for ICANN, and he's also the vice president for stakeholder engagement within the region for ICANN. And we've got Edmund Chung, of course, needs no introduction, very active. He is, running, he is managing, he's the CEO of .Asia organization, and he has been providing the secretariat facilities and secretariat services very kindly to the APrIGF for quite some time. So I will give a very quick overview of, highlighting the domain name ecosystem within the region, and thereafter I'll hand over the mic to my experts so they can, highlight the different aspects of the domain name system within the region. So very quickly, we are going to cover some points. Domain name industry in the Asia Pacific region. We will see the potential in Asia Pacific. Then the internet ecosystem, of course, domain name industry is directly linked to the internet users and the overall internet landscape. Then CCTLDs as part of the overall CCTLD. We will actually see the state of the position of CCTLDs within the region, how exactly the countries relate to each other within the regions, how exactly are they performing. Then the CCTLD count or the statistics in the regional markets. We will see some very discrete statistics on that slide. Then domain name density in the regional markets. We will again see the density in terms of population. Then cybersquatting, again, an interesting slide. We will actually see an interesting observation in this final slide. As you can see at the bottom, you see the potential, the Asia Pacific internet users penetration in the region. It's almost over 40% in the region, and it's evolving. So you can see half of the global internet users are basically from Asia Pacific, and it's evolving. Similarly, mobile internet penetrations. So these kind of mobile penetration and internet penetration directly contribute to the evolution of domain name industry within the region. And see this domain name industry potential within the region, because since more than 50% of the global languages, probably there are over 7,000 languages that are being spoken across the globe. More than 50% of them are from the Asia and Pacific region. And I can introduce this IDN program. Jiarong will be talking about this in detail. I mean, this actually was kind of making the internet universal and multilingual, so that more and more communities and segments from across the globe can effectively use the internet. This is actually an example, some examples of the IDNs. We can see different scripts. They'll be used as top-level domains. IDNs, for those of you who don't know, is internationalized domain names, whereby you can actually register a domain name in your own language using Cyrillic script or Arabic script or the Brahmic script. Next. Again, this is a state of CCTLDs in the Asia Pacific region. If you see .cn. This is not working. So .cn and India, I mean, since they are the largest markets, so we can clearly see that the majority of the chunk is covered by .cn and .in. But it's not always about the population within a country in the region. There we can see some very interesting statistics here that Australia and New Zealand, even though their population is not that big, but they are performing very well in terms of the number of CCTLDs registered. Okay, the CCTLD count, I mean, there are over 314. This is for the last quarter of 2014. The latest number, by the way, is for the first quarter of 2016. There are almost 326 million domain name registrations, which includes .com, .net, and .org and .info as well. So you can see in the region again, China, .cn, .in, but this is the unusual behavior of CCTLDs within the region. You can see Australia and then South Korea, New Zealand, even though their population compared to the rest of the regional markets within Asia Pacific is quite low, but their CCTLDs registrations are fairly high. Again, domain name density, this is domain name registered within a country per 1,000 population. So this kind of gives us the kind of a comparative analysis or trend of the CCTLD state or the top level domain statistics in the country. So we can see that New Zealand is the best performer within the region, and Australia and New Zealand, of course, right? Maldives again, and then Japan and South Korea, Singapore. These are the number of CCTLDs registered in China and India are highest in numbers, but their penetration is low. That's because their population is so high. So the penetration automatically is high for so the final slide, cybersquatting. Cybersquatting is kind of a it's illegal. I mean, people try to register domain names of well-known trademarks or businesses with the expectation that they will sell them in the future for high prices. This is sort of illegal, and it's a cybercrime. Basically, it actually results in disputes within the domain name industry. So these are the according to WPO statistics, the top 10 countries with the highest number of domain name disputes registered. If you can see, there is no one from Asia Pacific region in the top 10 cybersquatting number of cybersquatting registered across the globe. So this was kind of a quick overview of the region. Now I will try to hand over the mic to one of our experts, Jiarong, to shed some light on the overall IDN and TLD state within the Asia Pacific region. Thank you.
Test. Got it. Okay, this is Jiarong speaking. Thank you very much for inviting me to join the panel, and thank you for calling me an expert when clearly I am not one. I am more of a jack of all trades and a master of none, and know a little bit of everything, but not deep enough to be considered an expert. And within this room, actually, most people are familiar faces. So I'm just wondering whether I should just go through my deck anyway, because my deck basically is more for newcomers or people who don't know about the domain name scene. But I'll just run through the slides very quickly, and I think we can go into discussion instead. So first of all is I work for this organization called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. You've heard ICANN many times here in the APrIGF, very often in the context of the IANA stewardship transition. So I won't talk about that. The other area that you have heard of ICANN very much, which was from yesterday, was on multi-stakeholder approach. And the other keyword is on internationalized domain names. So the third one, IDNs, as we call it, has something to do with the domain name industry and how it will affect the Asia-Pacific region. So I will go into that a little bit more. Next slide, please. So when we think about the domain name industry, from ICANN's perspective, basically ICANN is the organization that helps to establish registries. Registries are organizations or companies that run the top-level domains. For example, VeriSign has a contract with ICANN, and they run the .com domain. Now that we have this new GTLD program, basically it means that you can have top-level domains of various forms. It can be a brand, or .location, and it can also be an internationalized domain name. So what this does is that it expands the domain name system. So previously, people were restricted to using certain domain names only and only in English ASCII characters. But now you can actually have more than that. You can use your own language and have your own domain names in your own language. And it's not only just the second level, but also at the top level as well. So the first round, we call it the first round of new GTLD program, is we saw 1,930 applications from all over the world. And what's happening now is that about 1,000 have been delegated, and that means that they can be used. And it basically allows for many opportunities within the whole world, and especially for the APAC region. Let me go to the next slide, please. So I mentioned about the program, the first round. After the applications on 23rd October, the first new GTLDs, the first new generic top-level domains, and I'll call it GTLDs going forward, were delegated through the new GTLD program. And the very first few were all IDNs. So it's very exciting, especially for our region, when we know that our languages are not English as a native language. And it actually provides a chance and opportunity for non-English native speaking community members to come online going forward. Now, about 3 years later, now we're in 2016, over 1,000 top-level domains have been delegated, and we're looking at about 256 still proceeding with the program. We hope to delegate them as much as possible as soon as possible. Now, the next slide, please. This is a little bit outdated slide, but the idea is to let you see the geographic distribution regarding the top-level domains being delegated around the world. So for the APAC region, now we have, as of January 2016, 149. I think we have much more than, we have a larger number than that now. This basically shows that we have previously limited to a few GTLDs. Now you can actually have more than that, and a number of these GTLDs are in IDNs. Now, next slide. So the benefits of the new GTLD program are listed here. Basically, if you're a business, actually every individual now, you want to have a web presence, and a web presence is usually tied to your domain name. people don't remember IP addresses that well. So a branding is tied to a domain name. Like if I think of a brand name like Nike, you will straight away think Nike.com. But now there is opportunity for you to have .Nike instead. If you're a group or community, you can have .wiki or .shop. Like within the region, you can actually have like .Tokyo. And here in Taiwan, you can have .Taipei. And people are starting to use it as well. Now, the fourth point I mentioned about was on IDNs. I won't elaborate a bit too much on this. But a key purpose of the whole new GTLD program is that it provides more competition. It provides consumers with more choices. So previously, you only have, if someone else took up McDonald's.com, then if you're McDonald's and you forgot to register first, then you have to think, oh, how do I go around that problem? So now, instead of having that problem, you can have more choices. You don't have to actually register McDonald's.com if you don't want to. You can go and register somewhere else. For small businesses, this also gives you the opportunity, like a statistic that I learned about is that a lot of the .com names have been taken up because that's the one that's most popular. Now, to register anything, you need about 15 letters to register something. So instead of like jarong.com, you have to register like jarong.com. Then it's easier to register because the shorter names have mostly been taken up. And if you're a small business and you want to register your own business, let's say a restaurant business, is it easier to put jarongscafe.com, which might have been taken up? So you may have to come up with something different like jarongcafe.com, which makes it very hard for people to remember. But with the new GTLD program, you have other options like .restaurant at the end or .cafe at the end. So then you register your business with that top-level domain. Then it allows people to actually easily remember and identify your web presence with you. So that offers people that choice and that competition. And the third area of the new GTLD program is on innovation. So we talked a little bit about the internationalized domain names and IDNs. And people need to innovate and be able to think of new ways that allows people to use IDNs online. So it's something that's very new at this point and it's very abstract. So I won't talk too much about it. But over the past couple of days when we discussed IDNs, we did talk about there's going to be some challenges, especially when we're using Chinese script, because there are variants and then there are cross-community issues like with the Japanese script and also with the Korean script. How do you innovate? How do you find a way to go around these problems? It actually creates innovation and allows us to think of better ways to help our communities come online. So this is another area of the new GTLD program that is beneficial. Now the next slide, please. So on the one hand, I talked about new GTLD program as enabling IDNs. IDNs are already available, especially for the country code top-level domains. Now on this slide, you see the map, and you see various country code top-level domains. They have actually already delegated IDNs for their countries. So in Taiwan, you can see the simplified version and the traditional version of the of Chinese script. Like for India as well, IN, you can see so many different scripts that can be representative of their country. And it's actually good for their local communities because there are communities that cannot speak English. And also communities that, while we think, oh, India is Hindi, is not true. There are so many languages there. So it allows for all these communities to come online and use the domain names to let them set up their web presence. Next slide, please. So coming back to this today's session, which talks about the DNS industry, the domain name industry as a revenue stream. If you were to ask me, what are some key areas would we be looking at if it's talking about revenue stream? I think there are many facets to this question, But I'll just put some stats regarding the new GTLD program that I've did some background work on. So next slide. So I remember when I first joined ICANN and we were rolling out the new GTLD program. Somebody said, you know, the new GTLD program doesn't make much sense, he said. And he's like, if I have a phone, I can only use one ringtone at one time. So why would I want to have more than one ringtone? And he equated that analogy with domain names. If I already have Nike.com, why would I want to have .Nike instead? That kind of analogy. And I didn't have a response at the time because I was brand new. And after a while, I realized that actually I do have a response. While on the one hand, we use one ringtone at one time in the past on our phones. But remember the time when we were all using candy bar phones. One very good industry was the industry that sells ringtones. So you can buy a ringtone for $1 or $2 and you can have the music that you want. And that industry was $1 million industry. So very interesting. Every different industry, there is always a different way of having competition and demand for it. Now that the new GTLD program has been rolled out, we can see a steady increase in the number of new GTLD registrations. So the number currently stands at 22 million. So that growth figure is not bad. Coming from ICANN, I won't comment so much on like, you know, why or who is doing very well. But the statistics here basically show that there is a demand for new GTLDs, especially at the second level. Next slide, please. One other area that I think I would want to highlight just as an introduction is ICANN, we published a GTLD Marketplace Health Index. This is in the beta phase and it's open for public comment. The idea behind this report is really to look at the GTLD marketplace, the health of the marketplace in things like competition, trust, market stability. And you can access this, actually if you just Google GTLD Marketplace Health Index ICANN, it's easier to find it than to go and click on the link. Then once you find it, this report is actually open for public comment, so anyone can comment and look at it, and you can give your inputs to whether this report helps you understand the GTLD marketplace's health. So I think for those people who are interested in this, please do go online, have a look, and then give us your comments so that we can make this report more comprehensive and that it can help to inform members of the public as well as yourself regarding how the GTLD marketplace is. Now, next slide. So some highlights about this Marketplace Health Index in its current draft. Since we are in the APAC community, I think I'll focus a little bit on new on IDNs. And you can see an increase in the IDNs registration, which is very positive. And the second, and the graph on the right side, you can see on a comparison between IDNs, brands, and geographic registrations. And so far, the geographic registrations is the highest, followed by IDNs, and the brands are relatively smaller in second level registration size. Now, next slide, please. This one is a little bit small, so I'll just talk through it. If you want to look at whether there is demand, you also want to look at over time, are people dropping off out of it? So it's only positive if the number of additions to the registrations is more than the number of people dropping out of it. So initially, in the first year of the new GTLD program, people are registering. So you can say, oh yeah, there's a demand. But you can't tell after 1 year whether people are still using that domain name, right? So this chart, actually, the first one on top talks about the number of new additions. And the chart below talks about the number of deletions. So people dropping off and not renewing their second level GTLD names. And you can see that the top one, the total number of additions is about, for the second half of 2015, is about 30,000. And the second half of 2015 for deletions is 18,000. So there are still more people registering than there are people who are dropping off of the new GTLD second level domains. So this is a positive sign. As far as like, there are many, of course, other questions, but we can only take this number based on registrations. So we just look at it based on this figure. Now let's go to the next slide. So just some thoughts I mentioned about the new GTLD program, that its aim is to enhance competition, allow for consumer choice and innovation. For the APAC region, we are a region of growth. As more people come online, they want their web presence. So there is an opportunity for using new GTLDs to give them that web presence. And also for APAC region, IDNs will be considered an area which is an area of growth for us. And the next billion people coming online will come from our region, many of whom do not speak English as their first language. So it could be an area of potential growth. And of course, we see some trends now about the registrations, but I mentioned, alluded to this a little bit, and I think we can take that during the discussion, which is like, you know, how many people actually use it, what kind of services revolve around these domain names, and how fast will we pick it up in the future. These are questions that we don't have answers to yet, but I think it's good for discussion later on. So I shall just stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorong, for this very comprehensive overview of the program. Now, I will request Edmund to go in.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you for having me here. So this is a very interesting topic for me, of course. Next slide, please. I'm going to keep saying that. And so just to start off with what I do, we operate the .Asia registry, and we were one of the first ones to operate a new GTLD in Asia. So click, please, and oh, you can. Oh, I have control. Wow. It's okay. Thank you. And so instead of like domain.com, what we do is offer domain.asia, and that's our income source. Jarong just mentioned an interesting thing, ringtones. I've never heard of that analogy, but the first thing that comes to mind is that yes, you can have multiple ringtones. If a different person calls you, it would, you know, my mom calls me, it rings differently. And it's more important. That goes into silent mode. But so that's actually one of the things. I mean, at .Asia, we actually see some of the usage is for small, medium-sized companies in the local area. For example, let's say here in Taiwan, they would use a .tw domain for their business. But when they expand their business to Asia, to Singapore, to Malaysia, to Philippines, they use a .Asia domain. That represents their identity and represents their, you know, their scope of business is beyond the local market. But of course, at the local market, it's useful to use a different domain. So I would answer that by saying, you know, you can have multiple ringtones. But back to the in terms of revenue generating, I think that's kind of the theme for today. That is what is helping .Asia fulfill its own mandate. Actually, .Asia is a not-for-profit organization, and the income that is coming in from the .Asia registrations is helping promote the internet development and adoption around Asia, which is our mandate. And one of the things that we are helping support is, of course, the APrIGF Secretariat, but also youth engagement, the Net Mission program, and the youth IGF that you see, you know, if you see young people running around, that's one of the programs that we support as well. But I guess coming back to the excitement part in terms of the revenue opportunity, for .Asia, we are seeing it somewhat firsthand in many ways, and big area is the ASEAN integration as well, especially for .Asia, but I guess for the Asia Pacific region in terms of domain growth as well. We all know that this is there has been an explosion in terms of new top-level domains. This is what sparked the discussion today. But of course, what also sparked the discussion today is the kind of unlevel playing field at this point in terms of the total number of top-level domains applied for. This is a little bit outdated, but the percentage would probably be similar. What is interesting is that in terms of the application, the ownership, Asia Pacific seems to be much far behind from North America and Europe. But if you adjust it a little bit, there are actually many North American companies sort of disguised as European companies, if you may. For example, Amazon uses an European entity to apply for these new top-level domains. If you use that adjustment, North America actually takes up about 70% of the applications. So that's a much different view. And Europe, that means also Europe is down to about 20%. So yes, Asia Pacific is still behind, but not that far behind Europe at this particular point. So, but still, you know, it's still just 16%. So, but what is interesting is that if you look at the current registrations, second-level domain registrations, more than half of the registrations are actually coming from Asia. And more than half of the top 10 registrars for new GTLDs are actually coming from Asia. This is a little bit outdated. In fact, those registrars are now ranking a little bit higher as well. So what we are seeing in .Asia is similar. We're seeing a lot of activity in Southeast Asia and the ASEAN countries, not only in terms of registrations, but also in terms of usage. Real-life .Asia usage we can see from Singapore, from Malaysia, from Indonesia, and India. And this is also reflective of the growth in terms of .Asia registrations over the years. When we first launched, the US and Europe has been among the top countries registering .Asia domains. It is no longer the case. In fact, the majority of domain registrations are coming from Asia, and US is still an important part, and up to a certain point, Germany was still an important country that with .Asia registrations. That is no longer the case. So the top 10, in fact, Germany, I think, just dropped off last year from the top 10. USA has dropped to number 8 in terms of the top 10 for .Asia. So one other thing that is interesting with the new GTLD expansion is, which is important for the market, is accredited registrars. In the ecosystem of domain names, we have the registry, which is kind of like the producer, and the registrars are kind of like a retailer or distributor. And it's very important for the channel to develop within a particular region. I've talked about this with the folks in Africa and Latin America. Their biggest challenge is having registrars and the channel to actually sell the domain names. So for .Asia, we're excited to see that with the new GTLD launch. In fact, in the last few years, we've jumped from about 150 accredited registrars in Asia for .Asia to over 250 at this point, 250 registrars worldwide. That's a pretty big jump for us in a few years' time. So this is these are some of the things that are happening. But really, when you talk about the market potential, it's that there is still a huge number of small, medium-sized businesses or micro businesses that do not have their own domain, and that's I guess somewhat to do with the level of awareness. And I think, you know, this particular session, I'm interested to talk a little bit about the evolution of domain names. Well, it used to be, when it was first designed, the domain name system was envisioned to be a command line on the internet. It's a tool to navigate the internet. But that has grown way beyond that. What is an interesting anecdote, I guess, talking not to John, but to Paul Malkapetras, who designed the DNS. He told us at one of the occasions that .com was actually an afterthought. The domain system is supposed to be the country code top-level domains, .us, .jp, .sg, .hk, and so they thought, okay, .com, .net, .org, who would want that? So they gave it to a small little company called Network Solutions to run it. Well, history has it now that it's at 300 million domains. Over a third of that is coming from .com. And that's I think that is one of the situations that in this region we're still not yet quite grasping that concept of domain names being more than just a command line. In fact, even more than just a brand name. It has evolved from a vanity name to brand protection to recent years. It's a very big part of what is called search engine optimization. It makes an impact, it makes a difference on two areas. One, if your domain name is a natural type-in keyword, it naturally enhances your ranking on Google and other search engines. But also, with multiple domains, you create a bigger presence on the internet. And that's one of the things that I think this Asia-Pacific community and the industry needs to let people know. So, of course, brand names are a fundamental part of domain names, but also even more important is that it's really about traffic and location. In the physical world, we think about chain stores. Why are there so many 7-Elevens, or why are there so many Starbucks? Because they collect traffic just around the corner. Every spot collects a little bit more traffic, and that's how chain stores work. And on the internet, multiple domains tend to have the same effect. Of course, it is a little bit different. You have what is called a long tail effect, with your main domain names having the majority of the traffic, but then there's a long tail which adds up to a lot. And a lot of companies are starting to realize that potential. Another challenge for, I guess, from Asia Pacific region is there's a tendency towards depending on platforms. Many of the local shops now just say, hey, I can just open up a Facebook page, and that should be enough. But of course, in the industry, we would like to see this happen. Because reality is that this is kind of like renting and owning property. Not exactly, but the value of your property goes up, and the value of the domain goes up as you own it and drive traffic to it. And by utilizing just the platform, you're really driving traffic to the platform and also losing control. Today is Facebook. Do anyone still remember MySpace? It was just a few years ago. Tomorrow it could be something else. There have been talk about people younger generation starting to move to different platforms. When that happens, you don't want to be depending on your brand, all the advertising that goes out. You want to have control of that traffic, and that's one of the things that I think we need to make more of the small, medium-sized companies in Asia Pacific aware. Then I was kind of asked to also talk a little bit about internationalized domain names, and of course that's my favorite topic. That is a very important aspect, I think, especially with the new GTLDs. People today have business cards that have one side that is all English and one side that may be all the local language. But today, there's still, for the email address or a domain name is still limited to English. Well, actually, not anymore. but they could actually use a multilingual domain name and the domain name in their own language. Yes, a lot of people say, hey, but users are not typing in the IDN or typing in the domain names in their native language. They're not used to it. But if you think about it and you go back to one of the trends that I talk about in terms of search engine optimization, users search in their own native language. People from China, from Japan, from Korea, they search in their own native language. In fact, I would hardly think that they would spell out the, what they want to search in English. And that's where IDNs come into play as well. And we're seeing a lot of activity actually starting from Japan in the last couple of years, starting to register domain names that clearly is towards search engine optimization, utilizing keywords that are being searched in Japanese. So this is another thing. Well, another thing that people think about is that, well, if you don't, if it's hard to type in or people are not readily typing in domain names in their native language, that could change as mobile and audio input becomes more prevalent. Think about it. When you're talking to your phone, highly unlikely you would spell out a domain name in English versus the more easy way to speak to your phone in your own native language. And that, I think, is going to make a difference and create a difference in terms of the market dynamics here in Asia as well. And speaking about mobile, some people say, well, there are mobile apps. Why do we even need domain names anymore? Two things I usually tell them about. Well, first of all, of course, apps are important and easy to navigate. But behind every app, behind every mobile app, there has got to be one or more domain names. The design of apps on your phone, most of them would connect back to the internet, and domain names are still a prevalent part of it. But more importantly, how many apps would you download on your phone? 50, 100, 500? Let's say 1,000 apps you download to your phone. Okay, fine. But you're not going to download the millions of companies who all try to have multiple apps for each of their products and services. You're just not going to be doing that. In order to navigate and explore to new services and new things, more likely in the future, especially with HTML5 and more dynamic web access from your phone, domain names are still going to come back, and they're still going to be very important for companies who are trying to get new customers. And speaking about new customers, one thing I'm completely confused about is that why companies would advertise to search on Google Play or search on App Store and Apple when they put a lot of, millions of dollars in advertising just to go to search on Google Play to find their app, but then 5 other apps that are absolutely their competitors show up at the same time. So you're actually paying advertising for your user to find your competition. That is very strange behavior that I couldn't understand. But then I guess what is important is to tell the companies that, hey, using a shorter domain name that people can immediately understand and relate to actually brings traffic under your control and brings your customers directly to your download your app. So that's those are some very interesting observations, I guess. And of course, it's all about the future. And as we talk about the new GTLDs, an important part is about I believe it's about the sustainable development goals, about the developing world, especially with Asia here, how we integrate that into a whole push to get them online, but also to get them into e-commerce, e-learning, and all those platforms to help support the continuing development of the internet. And speaking about the future, I think there are going to be very interesting development in the use of domain names that are yet to be, discovered in this time. Internet of Things is coming up, and we talked about naming different, and it's possible that your refrigerator, your oven, your sink could be connected to the internet someday. And in that time, and when you balance against privacy, you would understand what the importance of domain names and personal domain names is going to be. Well, today, uploading a few files to Google may not sound like so big of a deal, but uploading your whole wardrobe and uploading your toilet to Google may be something very, you would think twice. And having your own domain allows you to keep it within your home network. And that's a future that I think, domain names can support. So if you're interested and you want to hear more, actually there is a little bit of advertisement. In Hong Kong in September 19 to 22, we're going to have a domain fest and talk a lot more about domain in the marketplace. But to end with, I think the future is not just about volume. We always talk about how many new domains are registered, how many domains are registered under each TLD. I think it's not going to be just about volume. It's about how actually it's being used, how are domains used. It might not be on the second level. It could be on the third level, as I explained on the Internet of Things. Ultimately, it's about a strategic domain value, how a domain is actually used in the marketplace. And I think what will not change is that domain names are always going to be identities that connect with people. And that in itself is the most important thing. And I think, to build that value for the Asia Pacific community and make it a business. I think, when you can create value with identities connect with people, you can create market value for domain names. And that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Edmund, for that very dynamic and very informative presentation. Looking at the slide, the very interesting slide, which actually mentioned sync.john.asia and microwave.oven.john.asia. It's like we are thinking of Internet of Things as Internet of Domain Names. That's interesting slides. So before we move to the questions and answers and comments section, I would like to ask some experiences of APTLD within the Asia Pacific region. Leonid is going to share with us some case studies and his expertise, because APTLD is actually a very important and very major domain name in the association that is working within Asia Pacific. So let's see what exactly has Leonid for us.
Thank you. I'm Leonid Todorov from APTLD, as it was said already. Well, I don't have a presentation. Though, my job for this particular event, throughout the event, is to challenge my friend Jarong, and in this case, of course, I guess Edmund to some extent. I wouldn't claim that I have that immediate expertise from all the members of APTLD, but as I worked for .ru and also am in touch with many of our members, I believe that there are some insights of theirs which might be of a certain interest. But before I start, I'm really sorry that I can see my colleagues and friends from APTLD just across the table, because I would love to have ISPs here, because that's the session for them actually. And we're missing them in the room, so we're mostly talking to ourselves, which is a pity. But I do deliver some talks to ISPs in Russia, because usually I'm invited, like, okay, so you just provide some insights from Asia Pacific region. And I must first of all confess that ISPs are practically unaware, at least in Russia, are unaware of our existence. It was a good sample of 100 of ISPs in the room. 8 heard something about ICANN, and 3 or 4 were aware of IANA transition. That was in Russia. That was the second biggest city, the cultural capital of Russia, St. Petersburg. It's just for our friends at ICANN to memorize. Well, Figures. We've seen many figures. I will just go very quickly. We've seen many figures. Figures may be misleading, as you know, statistics. Well, first of all, population numbers in Asia Pacific. Indeed, the most populated region. How does it correlate with the number of domains? The answer is unlikely. Because, it's not about the population. Not everyone would love to have a domain name. Second, do we believe that the private sector would necessarily go after domain names? Hardly so, because again, as already Edmund mentioned, micro businesses and small businesses are not yet there. And one of the explanations I can offer, for example, that's for the Arab world. I checked with my Arab friends, like, for example, why there are so few registrations in the Middle East. I mean, relative to the population and the wealth of some of those countries. And the answer was Arab retailers, I mean, small and micro businesses, and even medium-sized businesses do not want their domain names because they're happy with what they have. They don't want to expand internationally. They want to stay a neighborhood-friendly, around-the-corner business rather than to go to Asia, for example, except for some companies which are fueled by government, backing, and which are really huge. Edmund also suggested that Facebook and some other platforms are our natural competitors in terms of domain names. And indeed, that's the case. And you know what? I think that companies, especially small and micro businesses, really want to save money. Even if they need to pay for a .com registration, they would just go to Facebook for free. And, they will be there because they are after a very specific group of customers, so they try to target a very special audience, for example, youngsters. So that's understandable, and we just need to factor it into our marketing calculations, whatever they are. So at the same time, we've seen figures that Australia and New Zealand are relatively better off than others. And that's another story, because probably the Anglo-Saxon psychology and mindset has something to do with promoting yourself, putting yourself ahead of others, making yourself unique. I don't know, it's just a speculation. Then interesting story about IDNs, very special story. And as you may have heard, Russia is ahead of the whole world in terms of development of IDN. So the Russian IDN is the biggest in the the Russian word into English, and then you try to memorize it. It's really hard. So basically, this is a very practical use. And the rest of those domain names, I would dare say they are not used at all. They were bought. I mean, when we were just started that open registrations in the IDN, I liked one of those domain names which was immediately bought by someone. And that domain name translated to English meant, I don't know why I'm buying this domain name, but I will buy it anyway, .rf. So you see, I mean, people just tried their best. Speaking of the domain market itself, I'm afraid that sometimes we are sort of biased a little bit because we are in this market. I mean, we're doing, this is our jobs, this is our lives, but frankly speaking, the market itself is very small. I mean, compare it to the oil market, for example. It's just several $billion at best. So this is a very small market. This is a very niche market with very specific product, which is domain names, with price elasticity. I'm sorry to say that. Price elasticity, absolutely uncertain. We don't know when and where customers will be in the mood to go and buy immediately. We saw that hype in China all of a sudden, and we don't know yet what it is all about. It's hard to say whether it was CNNIC's marketing, a wise marketing policy, or just a Chinese idea that, well, there is something in there. I'll better go and buy. I don't know why I'm buying this domain, but I'll buy it anyway, you know. But when you have 600 million users, you will definitely have a lot of them trying to do something about that. Now, some more things about, just a couple of comments about new GTLDs. Well, first of all, I'm always told that new GTLDs are all about innovation and stuff like that. Jerome, with all my respect, what kind of innovation are we talking about? I mean, I'm sorry, for me, innovation means something really tangible. I don't see any innovation in creating, I don't know, I'm sorry to say in the presence of ladies, .sucks. That's not innovation. That's just some juggling with words or symbols. And there is yet, so new GTLDs, from my perspective, introduced a lot of market confusion and a lot of market distortions rather than enabled, well, they did fuel some growth, but not to the extent one would expect, and we can see that many of them will just go bankrupt this or next year. Then some more things to say. Oh yeah. Registrars. Several years ago, I heard from the ICANN executive management that the major task for the next 3 years would be to triple the number of registrars in Africa. Well, 3 years passed. There are not so many registrars in Africa, nor there are many domains added in Africa. And I think that it doesn't have anything to do with registrars. Rather, there should be some maturity of that market, and there should be some understanding of, among customers, and of course, internet penetration in the area, which is probably the best engine or locomotive for the industry. So this is important. And finally, about Internet of Things. Well, Edmund suggested that, yes, there might be another take-off for domains with the rise of the Internet of Things. But there is yet an opposite experience as well. Edmund, I don't know if you heard that Jari Arko actually already, that's the one of the best technologists, how to say that, technological innovators, I would put it in such a way, who is in charge of, who runs the board, yeah. Oh, okay. So he's one of the leaders of IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force. So Jari Arko shared an exciting story how he actually implemented the Internet of Things at his place. And since then, when he's in Russia, I introduce himself. Now, please meet Jari Arko, the only man on earth who speaks, who communicates with his washer on Facebook. Because his devices are on Facebook, so he communicates. What I mean is that it's not necessarily domains, but platforms like Facebook, which might be home to all these appliances and devices. So again, we see that fierce competition on that side. And once again, getting back to ISPs, I think that our job at ICANN, at IPTLD, and even for our entrepreneurs, like well, I think Edmund is doing that, is just to reach out to ISPs and to educate them, to get, to make them aware that there are market opportunities as well as market failures. And for ISPs, I think it's important to understand, well, it may not be their core business, because ISPs deal with very practical things. Web hosting, something like that. And registrations could be just a nice and pleasant supplement to that. But who knows, over time they can get addicted and they can just change the vector of their operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard, for that very interesting analysis of the situation of domain name industry in Asia Pacific and more generally on a global scale. Are there any questions or comments from the audience here? No. Okay, I'll take the liberty then of having the mic. Edwin, based on your extensive experience within the Asia Pacific market operating this registry, what do you think are some of the major challenges for registries within the region, or for new entrants in the domain name industry? Would you like to share some experiences?
Sure. Sure. Thank you. I guess some of the challenges Leonid put it out pretty laid it out pretty barely, bare naked truth kind of thing. But it is the biggest challenge is actually very truthfully the platforms. Especially in this community, and this pulls me back to thinking about internet governance and thinking about the multi-stakeholder model and about a tendency towards deferring to authority and a tendency towards more authoritarian regimes, and people feel more comfortable under certain platforms. Is that going to change? Is that, maybe? Is that a definitive path? Maybe not. In my view, though, one of the things that is very important is the sense of brand and sense of intellectual property. If you especially look at the developing world, starting from China and all around Asia, there isn't a very strong sense of I got to build this brand as a small, medium-sized company or a mom-and-pop shop. I'm there. I deal with my neighbors as my customers. I identify a trade that can make money, and then I exploit a particular gap in the marketplace. Those are the more prevalent ideas in terms of creating new businesses. And creating brand is slightly less of a traditional mindset in terms of Asia Pacific, especially Asia and Southeast Asia mindset in terms of creating a new business. However, I'm more optimistic, and that is changing, especially with mom and pop shops or trading companies, which is the main thrust of small, medium-sized companies, switching over to a tech startups, becoming more and more prevalent in terms of people starting up businesses. That is going to make a difference, I believe, in terms of how brands are being established and how important small companies view their brand. Because in a virtual world, in a providing information services, brand, they're already providing a virtual service, virtual product. The brand becomes the differentiating factor quite a bit, and domain name plays a role in that, and the sense of that. Is it going to be the same as you got to have it, you got to get a Facebook page? Maybe not, but it would become it's like when you it's like things like I don't know, like oil and salt and that you put in your home, even if you don't cook, right? That's the kind of thing I think a domain name may become, but until it finds new applications. And my suggestions on Internet of Things is just one suggestion, but I think the group of people who find new applications for domain names are the ones who are going to really find, I guess, the gold in this marketplace. And it still has to be based on it being a name. If it's just a code, then anything will do. It needs to relate with names, and then building on that as an application. That's going to be, I think, the next breakthrough for domain names. And that kind of answers what Leonard says. Do we have that innovation yet? I don't think we are seeing a lot of that at this point. But I go back to say, but if you don't have the new GTLDs, there's no chance of creating that innovation into the future. So I'm still a supporter of new GTLDs. The marketplace is going to, there's some froth in it right now, perhaps, but I think, whoever finds, I think in the future, we still need to find the right application for names. People love names, and people love their own language. How it's actually going to play a role in this ecosystem, I hope I can find out.
Can I add just a couple of points? But I mean, Edmund, you put it, I share a lot of thoughts with you as well. Specifically on mom and pop shops and SMEs, I come from a developed country, so it was very hard for me to understand at first. But Leonie, you made the good point about the Arab world, and they like to serve their own communities. And it reminded me of this story that I learned when I was in Thailand. And it's, so I'll explain it in a bit of two parts. So the first thing is this. In Thailand, for example, if I'm a farmer, I want to sell my produce, it usually goes through like a distributor, and I have to sell through the middleman. And as a result, I get paid very low wages. Later on, the internet allowed them to actually have certain platforms where they can sell direct. And that created the opportunity for them to get higher wages, and was very good. But a lot of these platforms, they needed somebody to help them because the platforms were English, or just to get on it, you needed some level of English to do it. And in Thailand, to get around this is if you can have IDNs. And that's why the government, Wanawit's not here, but he will tell you that this is why the government is pushing so hard for IDNs to move in Thailand. The main reason is so that their mom and pop shops and farmers can actually go online and sell their own products there. We're not there yet, but this allows a platform for innovation in that sense. And coming back to the point on the new GTLD program and its aims, I think there's a little bit of a mismatch in expectations. The first thing is as Edmund said, the new GTLD program is like an application that forms a foundation for things to build upon. So there's some expectation that, ICANN, you set up the new GTLD program, all the new GTLDs in the market must work, and it's ICANN's responsibility for it. But it's not true. It's where we are is we create the base that allows for the applications to build on top of it. So where we are right now is what we are seeing. Some things would succeed, some may fail. Is it ICANN's responsibility for them succeeding or failing? That is not the role of ICANN. So I would just like to make it very clear for this. And it comes back to the question of, also we had a discussion on IDNs yesterday as well, that, when we have IDNs, will it really succeed? How will the pickup rate be? If we don't have IDNs, we won't know. So I think as a start, it's really having the IDNs as the base, then that gives people an opportunity to use them. And then we will see where the innovation comes thereafter. Thank you.
My name is Lim Chun Sai from SGNIC. It's the .SG registry in Singapore. First of all, I want to thank the panelists for their effort to share a lot of your insights on the domain name industry. I appreciate that. And of course, I certainly share the optimism of Edmund and Jarong. I think there's a lot of potential of growth for the new GTLD. Now, the question that I want to raise is something related to CCTLD, which is our core business. What we observed is since last year, for the .SG, we've seen a drop in growth. We are still growing, but not as high as before, where we used to have a low double-digit growth, like 10%, 11% growth per annum. But now we have noticed the delta is quite low. And then we try to do some searching, some checking to find out the real reason for this drop in GLO in the CCTLD registrations. And then, of course, we go and check the company registration records, and we see, oh, the SME registration is dropping. So we speculated that that could be the reason of why .sg registration is low. But we are not too sure whether this is the real reason, or could it be something due to the new GTLD program where some of the SME search to new GTLD. We are not opposing the new GTLD. Actually, we believe competitions. User will decide whether they want to go to international space or CCTLD space. And in fact, we support the fair and open competition. Let the user decide. But what we experience is that we have some concern because we don't know whether this could be due to the weak economy experienced by Singapore or even a weak global economy growth, or is it something due to the new GTLD? We hope is this not. Because we always believe that when a company, when an individual registered domain, it's based on need. He has to decide whether the need is regional, then you go to .asia. If it's global, then you go to the new GTLD, or if it's a domestic, then go to CCTLD. I think I've seen some CCTLD registry in the room, and maybe I want to see whether someone can share insight, maybe the panelists or some CCTLD insight. Do you have the same problem as what we experienced? Thank you.
Yeah, well, I would certainly echo what Syed just said, because that probably is the case across many CCTLDs. And that's what exactly I meant when I asked about innovation on the one hand and some distortive signals or distortive market behavior. CCTLDs have a very special mission. They are custodians and guardians of the nation's identity online, and as such, they should behave because they are thoroughly scrutinized by both the government, the society, I mean the community, the users. They should take care of, let's say, high morale across their respective zones. And now consider it, for example, to such an innovative move, which was, for example, tried by I've already mentioned that .sucks. .sucks offered to big brands, big names, I mean, they put that offer, please buy domains from us. I mean, just make sure that you make that registration. For example, well, Microsoft.sucks. I mean, to make sure that no one else would use that name, which would be otherwise, of course, offensive to Microsoft. So probably Microsoft or some other brand would just go and you know, buy that domain just because to fence themselves off from whatever undesirable connotations online. So we cannot afford these as CCTLDs. So we should, as you would imagine, we should play by the rules, while new GTLDs are free to go on their own as long as they are, as long as they comply with ICANN's bylaws formally, and they formally do not, you know, violate them. So that's what I mean. Well, of course it's market, I understand, but these are not equal conditions, and this is not fair competition to some extent.
Edmund here. So that's a very good question, Sai, and I've been doing some soul searching too. Soul searching. The reality, I think, and speaking to registrars, is that the key aspect, well, the unfortunate answer is yes, it is something to do with new GTLDs. But I think the better answer is that it's not just about the new GTLDs. It's about the bandwidth of registrars to bring out products, because we finally get into a situation now of a classic kind of supermarket issue with shelf space. Registrars sell over 1,000 TLDs now. They can't promote every single one of them. And in the last couple of years, there are many processes like Sunrise, like Launch, like premium names, auctions, that take away a lot of the bandwidth of registrars to do the regular work that they were doing previously, looking at, adding registrations to .sg, offering their customers, the variety. But there were, in the last couple of years, there were a lot of activities and I guess effort spent on launching new GTLDs. I think we should give it a couple more years until that settles down to really see how the market settles in. Although, then we're supposed to have the second round, right? But back to the core of it, I think it's really more about the registrars having bandwidth to serve the different registries, and that has actually created a different dynamic for registries. Registries who are kind of the producers, as I said, depend on the registrars to distribute their product to the retailer or directly to the consumer. And many of the registries, I'm guessing like .sg and .asia, we don't have a direct sales channel. And therefore, when the registrars are too busy doing something else, they have less time to do, offer this particular product, or it becomes at the back of the shelf and nobody sees the product. I think that's the situation, but that creates a different dynamic, which the new registries understand. That's the competitive marketplace they are in. They offer very different incentives for registrars to offer their top level domains, and that is a bit of a challenge, I guess, especially for CCTLDs and for nonprofits like ourselves, because a lot of those incentives are monetary based or investment based or really some money to get to the top of the shelf or to face the customer. Again, back to the classic supermarket situation, it's a matter of shelf space, I think, right now. Is that going to change? Is the digital world so expansive that it doesn't matter? You just search for everything. Yes and no. I think it will have a lasting impact on that particular aspect. How to respond to it, I think we will, at some point, at this point, we were thinking about a free market situation, but at some point, I think the registrars are going to have a stronger market power than registries, and at that point, I think some sort of policy may be appropriate for top level domains, both from CCs and from new GTLDs. Are we there yet? We're probably not quite there yet, but should we start the discussion? I think we should start the discussion in terms of whether any policies should be in place before it gets so far in terms of shelving war, I guess, that breaks out.
Hi, my name is Kai, and I'm from a human rights NGO in Malaysia. So I guess I'm one of your new people in the group, right? So I've got two questions. The first one is whether there are any restrictions in terms of the type of domain names that you can have. And the second one is actually from Twitter. I'm going to read it out. So it says that GTLD, generic top-level domains, are important point for freedom of expression. So if .my goes to, let's say, government of Malaysia, who manages or controls, say, .islam?
Thank you for your questions. So the first thing is just to explain again regarding how registries are established. So right now we have delegated about 1,000, and we are going to finish about another 200 over. So so it's not just like, oh, if I want to be a registry, I can be a registry. So there has to be an application process, a window that opens up for people to apply for certain GTLDs. So the first round, we are still implementing it. So the next time when new other new GTLDs are available will be when the next round happens. So we mentioned about the first round and the next round. As to when the next round will happen, there have been some rough estimates because we need to do some reviews currently regarding the first round, and we're still ongoing. And we need to complete those reviews. A rough deadline by our president for the Global Domains Division is sometime around 2020. So it will be some time before we actually look at having more than what we have currently in terms of the new GTLD names. So I think that's the first question to setting the base for this. Then coming back to your question regarding, are there restrictions to domain name types? There are certain restrictions in terms of certain names, like if it is a public interest kind of name. So there are certain parameters that's set around what kind of name would constitute a public interest type of name. And if it falls under that category, you cannot just become a registry for that so easily. The question then becomes that if I apply, say for example, I want to apply for .islam, then I have to demonstrate that I am serving the public interest to run .islam as a registry. And there will be many checks and balances to make sure that the person or the organization applying for .islam is indeed serving the public interest. So it is not because someone like me, I want to run .islam, I can just make an application and I will definitely get it. So there are some checks in that sense. There are other checks also in terms of, let's say 2 different people are applying for the same name. Yeah, so then there will be checks like if say I'm applying .Singapore in full, then I'm Jarong the individual applying .Singapore, then of course we have to check that is it representative of Singapore, the Singapore government, or Singapore, the public interest of Singapore. We have to check through these criteria. So only if you meet the criteria, then your application can go through. If not, then there will be, it's not so simple that you can just actually apply for a name and then be a registry for it. So coming back to your question regarding like who controls .islam, so because it is a public interest requirement, so it's not so simple to be anyone who can just control .islam. And I think it really depends on at the time when there is application for it, who is the person or organization applying for it, and will there be any other people applying? And also thirdly, when there are applications, there is also a process which allows for people to look at the applications. And community members, in other words, members of the public, can actually raise a point to say that this organization shouldn't be applying for this for whatsoever reasons. So there are some steps around it that helps to make sure that make sure that the right people are actually applying for the right domain names.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to get back a little bit to what Edmund was saying about this supermarket stuff. You know, I just realized that one of those probably undesirable consequences of the launch of new GTLDs. Again, let me just explain. Well, first of all, I'm not against new GTLDs, but I'm just trying to play that devil's advocate on the one hand. On the other hand, indeed, CC-TLDs have seen their growth stalled. So that's kind of problem, that concern, which I cannot but help but convey to the audience. So with the registrars, it's a very interesting story. I just realized that basically when facing this extensive choice, registrars, on the one hand, I mean, and don't you forget that the registrar business is not that simple. It's not that Edmund comes to me and says, I want to sell the domain names from, let's say, .ru. let me do it and I will pay you some money. No, he should comply with certain regulations within, for example, Russia. He should make a deposit first, place a deposit first, just to make sure that he's financially sound and sustainable, and you know, there are some credentials. Anyway, and then of course it's a very tricky business, because all the risks are his, but deposit is already in my safe box. So, but what I mean is that for registrars, well, on the one hand, they are getting picky, really picky, because yes, I want this or that a particular domain, I mean TLD, and I will work with that. On the other hand, what we noticed recently is that small registrars are going out of business. You know, I mean, again, that's quite understandable. The industry should go through consolidation, but we can see that their share, I may be wrong, I don't know how it works across Asia Pacific, but the big guys play their own games, and small registrars, I mean, their share is shrinking. And another interesting phenomenon is that big registrars have been for a while sort of ignorant, for example, of the APTLD community. I mean, we invited them for our meetings, they wouldn't show up, or they will send some representative. This time, and it was like second time, in Auckland in February, we had a meeting, all the big guys were there, and no less than vice presidents. And to me, this is a sign that registrars, I mean big registrars, are not that particularly sure that new GTLDs is that bonanza which they had hoped for. That's just an assumption again.
Oh, hello. I know we're running out of time, but just one comment. Actually, exactly what Leonard, you said, registrars used to put a deposit with registries. With the new GTLDs, that's actually no longer the case. A lot of registrars are asking for post-payment, so the risk is also borne directly by registries as well. So that is the changing dynamics of the marketplace in this, I guess, new landscape.
Okay, thank you very much. I know there are certain challenges in these programs like IDNs and NGTLDs, but yes, as Gia and Edmund and Leonard mentioned, we have to be optimistic, and there is a big room for investment. Yes, there are challenges, Leonard. Yeah, true. We agree. But as the ICANN's recent consumer, the global consumer research study that was released last month, there is this very interesting trend that in Asia Pacific, consumers' awareness is in fact 20 points high compared to Europe and North America, and so there are some positive points coming in from the market and from the bottom of the market. With this, in fact, we come to the end of this workshop. I thank all of you for your time, and I thank the panelists for giving us time. Thank you very much. Thank you.